I buy my dream oceanfront villa, and within an hour my son-in-law calls. "We're coming," he says. 15 of us. Your master bedroom, your food, your life. When I tell him no, he laughs like I've told a joke. When I hold the line, he brings a convoy, a mob of strangers spilling into my foyer. Beer coolers slam onto marble counters, wet sandals scar the floors, voices echo through hallways I haven't even finished unpacking. My master bedroom door becomes a battlefield. Their chorus of entitlement swells, and then the final blow lands. "Emily would be ashamed of you, old man." That's when everything shifts. I step back from the door, lock myself in the study, and make one call. Hours later, the police knock with the authority of law. Days later, I open a file thick with receipts, records, and seals. And weeks later, the judge reads the truth out loud for everyone to hear. The house empties, the internet turns, and justice lands exactly where it belongs. Before we roll, please subscribe and tell us what time it is where you're watching. We love hearing from folks coast to coast. The first morning in the villa began as Richard had pictured. Coffee steamed on the workbench he had rolled into the kitchen, an island of habit among boxes. He lined up labeled bins, fasteners in one, felt pads in another, spare hinges in a third. The caliper and the tape measure sat squared to the edge, a geometry that steadied him. Beyond the glass, the ocean moved in long, even breaths that made the house feel alive. He had unpacked one thing first. Emily's photo stood by the window in a simple silver frame, just as it had on his old mantel. She was 29 in that picture, a wool collar up against a Chicago wind, eyes laughing. He set a small index card beside the frame and pinned another copy near his desk. Be generous, not naive. He wrote the line after a winter when help had turned into expectation and kept the words close. A spiral ledger lay open. It wasn't a money ledger, though money passed through it like weather. It was a record of a life lived carefully. He scribbled entries that marked a private rhythm. Change HVAC filters in September. Oil the sliders. Call the florist with Emily's favorite order on her birthday. He logged paint codes and service dates and notes that sounded like a prayer. Unpack books. Walk the beach. Put the kettle on at dusk. He lifted the lid from a box marked crystal and pressed his thumb along the seam of paper. A wine glass rolled into his palm. Sun scattered in it, a tiny rainbow flaring across the quartz island. He stood a beat, not drinking, just letting the weight of the glass sit in his hand like permission to rest. This, he told himself, is the reward. Not the glass, but the quiet. The reward had not appeared out of luck. It arrived after 40 years of showing up. He had worked through shutdowns and delays, through busted lintels and wrong shipments, through meetings where budgets argued with physics and physics won. Promotions came, not like applause, but like heavier toolboxes he knew how to carry. He did not buy the kind of shiny that rusts fast. He saved for what would not tire him out when the toolbox was finally down. Giving had been part of the rhythm, too, and at first it felt right. 6 months after Emily and Brian married, Brian called with a voice that tried to sound brave. The startup had folded. 18,000. Dad and I can make everyone whole. Richard transferred the funds and slept light but proud. 2 years later, he wrote tuition checks, 45,000 across 4 semesters. Then a down payment to lower a punishing rate, 60,000. During the long nights of oncology and hope, he paid 85,000 in bills that bought time. Between the big numbers, the small ones ran like a creek. Groceries when a card declined. Tires when winter arrived early, flights for visits that mattered. When Brian first joined the family, he moved like a host already in charge of the music. Family helps family, he liked to say, a phrase that sounded warm until the requests were already in motion. He used, "We decided the way others use, please." He turned plans into group plans, assets into shared resources, boundaries into obstacles to be negotiated. He smiled easily, hugged quickly, and steered without touching the wheel. Jessica added a shine that gathered attention. She could frame a moment with her phone and make it look like a magazine spread in under a minute. She used words like community and content in the same breath and pivoted from concern to promotion as fluidly as a wave changes shape. In quiet seconds, she was gentle, but in a crowd she widened every story until an audience could stand inside it. When she said family, she meant followers too, and believed a sunset was not complete until it had been posted. The villa felt like a promise kept at last. 2 stories of clean lines set back from a private beach. Windows turned the ocean into a third wall. A workshop-sized corner waited in the garage, and a kitchen welcomed the way he cooked when he had time. The price came after a sale, a disciplined down payment, and a mortgage sized to let him sleep. He bought it not to impress anyone, but because the place answered 2 questions. Where will I rest? Where will I build the small things that make a day good? In escrow, the realtor said a line that stuck. Homes hold boundaries, or they get swallowed. Richard had nodded like a man who understood. He had built retaining walls and drainage plans and place forms to keep water from eating a foundation. He knew what the sentence meant for soil and stone. At the bank, the accountant leaned back with the calm of someone who had seen generosity lift and drown families. Documentation turns stories into facts, she said, and he wrote it in the ledger like a formula. He kept that clarity in small ways. The master bedroom would be refuge, a place for sleep and memory, not a guest room with a better view. The guest room was ready with good linens, quiet lamps, and a basket of comforts he liked when he traveled. A pantry shelf held labeled staples for visitors. He told Brian he would help with advice and connections and sometimes resources when the need was genuine and the plan sound. He meant every word. He also meant that no one else would decide what he owed. The phone rang while he was cutting open a box of books. He freed a field notes volume from a year he and Emily had spent documenting bridges for a school project. A pressed yellow maple fell from between pages, and he set it beside the mantra card. The surf exhaled. The house answered with settling sounds, a tick in the ductwork, a thread of wind at a sill that would need weather stripping. He thought of walking down to the shore to feel the water numb his ankles and remind him of scale. The screen flashed Brian's name. A reflex tightened his chest even before he answered, a pattern built from years of emergencies that were rarely urgent. He took the call anyway. "Hello, Brian." The greeting landed into a voice already in motion. "We're on our way to you. 15. Towels, food, beds. We'll take the master. We will be there in 40 minutes. Jessica wants the view." He tried to slow the momentum with facts. "I'm not ready for guests. Boxes everywhere. No bedding for a group." His voice stayed calm, the way you speak to someone you want to respect even when respect is not being returned. Brian's reply came like a shrug through the tower. "Figure it out. You're retired. Time is what you have. The kids need the pool. The convoy is already rolling." Richard looked at the bins on the workbench, each one labeled, each one holding a necessary thing in the right place. He looked at the ocean breathing beyond the glass. He looked at Emily at 29 in the silver frame, then at 9 on a pier, palms on the rail, hair whipped by wind. He remembered the realtor's sentence about boundaries and the accountant's sentence about facts. He heard both as if they had been written for this exact minute. He placed the pressed maple back inside the field notes and closed the cover. He straightened the wine glass on the counter, wiped a faint print from its bowl, and placed it in a cabinet. He slid the ledger close and wrote a new line in his spare, tidy print. "First week in the house. Good light, good air. Hold the line." Then he lifted the phone, let his breath settle, and said what he had needed to learn to say. "No, Brian, not today. Not like this. Not 15. Engines climbed the private road before Richard saw the convoy. Dust lifted beyond the palms, then 4 vehicles rolled into the circular drive. Doors flew open. Voices spilled across the stone. Brian's SUV stopped at the head, and he stepped out with the confidence of a man arriving at property he already owned. We made great time. Jessica was out with her phone held high, lens catching the sweep of water and glass. Behind them came Mike with a cooler, Ashley with duffels, two couples Richard barely recognized, and a pair of 20-somethings carrying beach floats. Richard opened the door because he believed in saying things face to face. The decision felt old-fashioned the moment the threshold broke. People streamed past him without the pause a host expects or a guest offers. A cooler landed on the island with a thud. Wet sandals squeaked across the marble. Someone connected a phone to the sound system, and a thumping playlist replaced the surf. Room assignments started like orders. Jessica and I will take the master. Mike, grab the ocean guest. Ash, the balcony. Voices overlapped with the speed of practiced entitlement. A stranger held a stack of towels and called out sizes like a quartermaster. Every sentence carried the same assumption. This is ours now. Richard took 2 steps toward the hallway. The house had shifted underneath him, furniture rearranged by a current that arrived loud and fast. He held up a hand, palm steady. The master is off limits. It's my space. We'll make the guest rooms comfortable. Brian laughed the way people laugh at a joke they think you must be telling. Come on, Richard. Don't be selfish. Jessica needs that light for her morning practice. It helps her followers. He pressed a hand on Richard's shoulder and tried to steer him aside. Richard moved his shoulder out from under the hand and repeated the sentence. The master is off limits. It's my space. He kept his tone even. Jessica's live stream kept rolling as she crossed thresholds like a tour guide. We're at my father-in-law's resort, she told the camera, pivoting to show the ocean and kitchen. Hearts floated up the screen. She turned toward the hallway with bright expectation. Richard stepped into the doorway of the master and filled it. The bed was made. The nightstand held the silver frame with Emily's photo. A book lay face down with a ribbon. The group collected behind Brian, their body language spreading to fill the width of the hall. Move, Brian said, soft at first. We drove 4 hours. This is what family does. We share. Jessica lifted her suitcase and angled it to slip past Richard's hip. He simply did not move. The suitcase knocked his shin and bounced back. A chorus rose, that familiar mixture of mockery and moral framing. Don't be so dramatic. We're not strangers. Emily would want us here. We made plans. We brought food. Look how big the place is. You won't even notice. Richard heard the words the way he would hear wind speed on a readout. He named the pattern to steady himself. Pressure, justification, guilt, speed. He thought of the realtor saying homes hold boundaries or they get swallowed. He saw it happening. The house was being turned by people who had not built it or paid for it. Brian leaned in close, voice pitched for the room beyond Richard's body. This is why we have to push him sometimes, he told the group. He gets stuck in selfishness. He needs help remembering we're a family. He turned back. Step aside. Don't make this weird. Jessica tried the softest voice. Rick, honey, please. You know I create community online. This space can help people relax and heal. Sharing it is generous. Richard looked over her shoulder into the bedroom. He let his eyes rest on the book ribbon, the dent where his hand had pressed into the duvet this morning, the frame with Emily smiling back into the light. He understood in one beat what this was and what it had been for years. Family as a crowbar, grief as a tool, help used like a key to other people's locks. His gifts reframed as debt he would never finish paying. We're done, he said quietly. The master is off limits. The house is not a resort. The visit is not happening. A hush spread. Then Brian raised the stakes. If you keep this up, you will lose us. Emily would be ashamed of you. She wanted us close. He said the name like leverage. The sentence cut and clarified. Weaponized grief had a sound, a hinge slamming. Richard held Brian's eyes with a calm that felt new. "Do not use my daughter to pry open my door," he said. The words were not loud. They were steel. Someone scoffed, and the chorus returned. "He's having an episode. He'll calm down. He's confused from the move." A woman he did not know used a voice for a child. "Can you be flexible for once?" The music bumped back up as if the house were a speaker and Brian had a dial. Richard stepped back one pace from the threshold, then turned and walked away from the line of bodies. For a second, the group mistook the motion for surrender and surged, but he pivoted left toward the study. The move confused them long enough for him to cross the rug, enter the room, and close the door. He turned the lock firmly. The quiet that followed was the loudest sound he had heard all afternoon. HVAC whispered through the vent. His pulse settled. He placed his palm on the oak desk and breathed the way he had breathed during tough meetings when a clear mind mattered more than a loud one. Knuckles hit the wood and the handle in alternating rhythms, a performance of concern pressed into the shape of a threat. "Richard, come on. Don't be ridiculous. Let's talk like adults. You can't call anybody. This is family." He looked at the ledger on his desk. The last line he had written an hour earlier faced him. "Hold the line." He took out his phone and scrolled past Brian's name to the 3 digits that were a tool, not a punishment. "I am the homeowner," he told the dispatcher. "I have people on my property who entered without permission and refused to leave. I am not in immediate danger. I can provide documentation." Outside, hall voices changed shape as hushed conferences replaced bravado. Someone silenced the playlist. He answered questions. He kept his mind on the count and details that would matter. He did not pace. He did not argue. He did not open the door to prove he was reasonable. He stayed with the plan. He had chosen the moment he felt the hand and heard the sentence about selfishness. When the lock clicked, the decision seated fully in the room, as if the study shifted its center of gravity under his feet. A line had been drawn. Without the lock, the house had already turned. With it, the house began to turn back. The 911 operator answered on the 3rd ring with a steady voice that seemed to quiet the air inside the study. She asked Richard to state his name, address, and the nature of the problem. He delivered each detail the way he had presented project specs for 40 years, crisp, complete, and without apology. "I am the homeowner. 15 uninvited people entered my property. I told them to leave. They refused. I have my deed and identification in this room. I am safe for now behind a locked door." The operator confirmed what he needed to hear. "Sir, you have the right to control access to your home. If guests refuse to leave, it is trespassing. 2 officers are en route. Estimated arrival 15 to 20 minutes. Please remain in a secure location. If anyone attempts entry, call back immediately." He thanked her, ended the call, and felt the first unclenching in his chest since the convoy nosed into the drive. The house hummed around him with a low air current, the hush after a storm gust. On the other side of the door came the shuffle of shoes and the friction of whispers. "He is bluffing. He always backs down. Give him 5 minutes, and he will apologize." Another voice tried sincerity like a borrowed coat. "We should be kind. He is grieving." That line had always been the hinge. Today it did not swing. Richard pulled his chair to the desk and set the ledger in front of him, as if the study were a small command room. He wrote the word facts on a clean page and drew 4 columns with his pencil. Date, amount, purpose, promise. He did not reach for memories. He reached for records. The entries lived in his bank portal and his tax folders, but he knew the big numbers by heart because they had rearranged his plans each time they left his account. MBA tuition, he wrote. 2 years, 45,000 spread over 8 transfers. Purpose, new career. Promise, repay after promotion. Down payment assistance, 60,000, single transfer. Purpose: qualify for mortgage they could not secure alone. Promise: refinance within 12 months and repay principal from equity. Medical support during Emily's treatment, $85,000 across a dozen hospital and specialist payments. Purpose: save the person all of them loved. The pencil moved, and the old habit of order settled him. He added a note in the promise column beside each line where Brian had smiled and said after it stabilizes. The phrase had sounded reasonable at the time, the way a forecast graph looks clean before the missed milestones stack up. After it stabilizes had turned into a bridge between today and a repayment that never arrived. He drew a diagonal line through the blank. Repayments, and wrote the truth. Not repaid. Outside the door, his name came as a question. Richard. Buddy, unlock this so we can talk like family. The handle clicked twice, then stopped. The chorus dimmed and reorganized, voices leaning on the word family, the way they leaned on his door. He listened without reacting, then returned to the page. He listed the house's new expenses he had planned to carry alone. Property tax installments scheduled on his calendar. Insurance already paid. Maintenance contracts for the elevator and the generator. None of those obligations had shown up in Brian's voice when he demanded the master, or in Jessica's feed when she described the kitchen to strangers. He turned the page and made another table. Column 1 he labeled what I gave. Column 2 he labeled what they claimed. He filled the second column with the phrases that had rewritten his gifts as ongoing debt. Family helps family. You wouldn't want to disappoint the kids. Emily would want this. The master makes sense for content. He paused and wrote the sentence that changed the hardness behind his eyes into clarity. I am not harsh. I am finally accurate. He circled it. The circle steadied him more than any argument ever had. Accuracy had been his working faith for decades. Measure twice, cut once, verify data, then decide. He realized that for years he had measured pain and guilt, then cut away his boundaries to fit other people's demands. Today, he would measure behavior and facts instead. The weight inside his chest moved from shame to alignment, pieces clicking into place like a well-machined part. He imagined the documentation his accountant had praised, receipts with bank stamps, email threads with subject lines requesting help, transfers labeled clearly in his online records. He would gather them. He would not list them to win points or to humiliate anyone. He would assemble them because accuracy turns stories into facts, and facts hold when storms hit. The house carried sound like a shell carries ocean. He heard Jessica's whispering, urgent and strained. He is really doing it. He called them. Another voice answered, half disbelief, half irritation. He won't go through with it. He hates conflict. He will fold when they arrive and make us look like the reasonable ones. He pictured the faces, surprised to find that he did not feel hatred. He felt distance growing into a healthy gap, the space he had needed and not taken. He stood and crossed to the small kettle on the credenza. He filled it with sink water from the wet bar, set it on its base, and clicked the switch. The tiny light glowed. The simple action marked a transition from reacting to composing. He placed the ledger beside the phone and picked up his pen again. He wrote a single sentence that would serve as a vow. No more unmanaged generosity. He underlined it twice, then added the behaviors that would keep the promise honest. Requests belong in writing. Support requires a plan. Boundaries protect love. Emergencies will not be decided by pressure or guilt. The siren arrived as a faint thread far down the coast road, then grew until the Doppler pulled it past, dipped, and rose again as the cruiser took the final curve. The sound washed through the glass like distant thunder. He sipped from a mug of plain hot water, heat moving into his throat and chest, a gentle ballast against the adrenaline. Footsteps hurried in the hall. Someone tried the handle again, then backed away. The doorbell rang with the kind of tone that changes a room. It did not ask. It announced. Richard placed the pencil across the top of the ledger and closed the cover. He slid his driver's license and a copy of the deed from the desk drawer and set them on the blotter. He picked up the phone, ready to confirm details and meet facts with facts. Before he moved, he let his eyes rest on Emily's photo on the bookshelf. He did not ask her for permission, as he had for so many years when decisions carried weight. He remembered the way she had sat beside him on the porch, her hand warm over his, saying, "Be generous, not naive. Measure twice before cutting once." He remembered. The house had felt like a stage since the convoy arrived. Now it felt like a document. The kettle clicked off. Steam curled in a thin ribbon, the faint tap of expanding metal ticking in the quiet, while surf and wind braided a steady hush. The pen left the slight smell of graphite where the underlines crossed the page. Surf pressed and released on the beach beyond the glass. Through the door came the muffled exchange of introductions. A man with a calm baritone identified himself and asked who lived here. Another voice, younger, carried the clipped patience of someone trained to reset chaos. "Please step aside. Let the homeowner speak." Richard stood, squared the edges of the deed and license together, and breathed once more. The old reflex to soften and smooth flickered up and then went out, as if the room itself refused to relight it. He was not choosing anger. He was choosing accuracy. He opened the door. Officer Johnson introduced himself with a calm nod. Beside him, Officer Martinez scanned the living room, noting coolers, stacked luggage, and wet footprints across the marble. Richard stood by the study door with his license and a crisp copy of the deed. He did not make a speech. He handed over the papers and waited. "Mr. Clark," Officer Johnson said after a quick look, "thank you. This establishes ownership." He turned to the crowd. "Folks, the law is simple. The homeowner asked you to leave. You refused. That makes your presence trespass. You will have 15 minutes to collect your belongings and vacate the property. If anyone remains after that, we will proceed with removal and citations." Officer Martinez set her watch. 15 minutes begins now. The room tried to turn itself into a misunderstanding, but the badges did not flinch. Brian spread his hands as if floating on reason. "Officers, we are family. We drove hours to see him. He is overwhelmed. We can figure this out together." Officer Johnson kept the same even tone. "Family status does not override property rights. The homeowner decides who stays. He has decided." Jessica dabbed at her eyes and moved toward the hallway. Mike snapped a cooler shut. Kevin gathered beach towels like a retreating flag. The playlist died. Voices fell to whispers that slipped into glares. People watched the clock. Richard did not gloat. He kept his hands at his sides and his breath in rhythm with the surf beyond the glass. He stepped aside to let the stream of guests reverse itself. The procession looked smaller in exit than in entry. Without music and bravado, it was just people carrying too much. A few muttered apologies that were more about avoiding charges than about understanding. Others tucked their chins and hurried for the door. Brian lingered. He planted himself near the foyer as if a new argument might sprout there. He nodded toward Richard like a warning. "This is not over." Richard did not reply. Officer Martinez did. "Sir, keep moving. You have 8 minutes." The driveway filled with reverse lights and clattering trunk lids. The convoy that had arrived like a parade of ownership now looked like traffic, ordinary and impatient. The last car rolled onto the coastal road as the sky deepened from gold to ink. Officer Johnson finished the paperwork on the foyer table. "Here is your incident number, Mr. Clark. If anyone returns without permission, call immediately. This establishes a clear record. You did the right thing." The door closed on silence. Not triumph, not yet. Just the quiet after a machine powers down. Richard stood in the foyer and let the stillness spread. He walked to the master and stopped in the doorway. The bed was untouched, but a corner of the duvet was turned as if the room had inhaled and held its breath. On the nightstand, Emily's frame lay face down where it had been knocked. He lifted it and saw a thin crack across the glass. He set it upright and smoothed the folded edge of fabric. He made a slow circuit of the rooms, resetting a chair, righting a lampshade, closing a drawer someone had pulled open to see what a stranger owned. In the kitchen, he stacked abandoned cans by the trash and wiped the faint ring left by a wet bottle. The act of restoring order did not erase the unease, but it gave it edges. Edges he could plan around. His phone buzzed on the counter. A message from Brian arrived like a siren. Unbelievable. You called the cops on family. Emily would be ashamed. Another followed. We were trying to include you. You humiliated us. The next one dropped tone. You owe me for gas and lost bookings. Then the heat arrived. This will not stand. Everyone will know what you did. The feed kept building. A photo of Jessica's tear-streaked face. A warning about lawyers. Richard scrolled for 1 minute, then put the phone face down. He was not surprised at the swing from moral appeal to threat. He had seen that arc before, usually when a budget talk met a request that outran earnings. The difference now was not the content. It was his response. He refused to argue inside a phone. He refused to feed the rhythm that had kept him gut-punched and apologizing for years. He carried the ledger to the study and opened a blank page. Above a quiet underline, he wrote a simple sentence. Let documentation speak. He added the steps as if writing an internal work order. Gather bank records, transfers, dates, and purposes. Screenshot public claims that contradict payments. Ask the bank for certified copies. Schedule a meeting with Howard in the morning. Draft a clean summary with amounts, promises, outcomes. He capped the pen and sat back. The house settled. Outside, the surf kept its steady breath under the night. Inside, the air conditioner clicked off and left a deeper stillness. Uneasy, yes. Empty, no. Just honest. He picked up Emily's photo again, carried it to the study, and set it on the bookshelf where the frame would not be jostled. His phone buzzed again and again. He let it. The screen could flare like a beacon on dark water. He would not steer toward it. The plan did not require his anger, only his record. He turned on the desk lamp and opened his email to the folder where receipts slept. He tagged the large transfers and flagged the messages that described need. He created a fresh directory and labeled it with the date. The clicks were small and final, like tiny latches closing. He returned to the kitchen, filled a glass with water, and stood at the open door to the terrace. The ocean night was cool and salt clean. He listened until his shoulders dropped. He did not revise old arguments in his head. He traced the sequence ahead. Bank in the morning, then attorney, then a simple statement online with images of transactions and none of the heat. He would not smear. He would show. If a storm formed on the internet, it would break against facts. He turned out the lights one by one on his way to bed. At the threshold, he paused, looking at the mended order. He slid the phone into a drawer and let the room go dark for good. The uneasy feeling did not vanish. It shifted into a focused point, like a laser dot that marked where to drill. The long game had begun. Overnight, Brian turned a private dispute into a public spectacle. His post went up just after midnight, accusing me of calling the police on family and claiming money had hardened my heart. He added a detail that never happened. The children stood crying at my gate while sirens echoed over the water. He framed the villa as a palace closed to kin, and he ended with a plea for prayers that doubled as a rallying cry. Within minutes, shares multiplied. Hearts bloomed under a lie. Jessica followed at 2 a.m. with a shaky car video. She spoke in a whisper about a surprise visit to bring warmth to a grieving father, about a misunderstanding that became a betrayal, about little ones asleep in car seats who would wake to a world where family meant nothing. She tagged cousins, friends, and a handful of lifestyle pages. The algorithm did the rest, turning a narrative into momentum. I woke to gulls and a bright line of water, poured coffee and opened my phone. The notifications stacked like shingles. I tapped the first post, recognized the angle of my gate in the photo, and read my life reframed in a paragraph. Comments decided my character in seconds. Some people I knew asked how I could turn away family. Strangers awarded themselves a verdict with one swipe. The ocean stayed calm. I did not. I tried one sober comment. I wrote that 15 adults arrived without invitation, that no children were present, that officers confirmed my right to ask guests to leave. My tone was even. The replies were not. Cold man, wrote one. Lawful is not loving, wrote another. Someone accused me of rewriting a night they had not witnessed. A friend suggested I was letting the house own me. Facts sank in a tide, built for feelings. I closed the app and set the phone screen down. The venue had to change. I would move the matter from a stage built for performance to a room built for proof. I walked to my desk and opened a fresh binder. I wrote a simple label on the spine, pattern of support. Then I began to assemble the record I had kept for years without knowing it would someday defend the peace I had earned. Bank records came first. I downloaded statements and circled transfers where the memo lines told a story in 4 words or fewer. MBA tuition, down payment, medical bills, emergency repairs. I printed canceled checks and stapled receipts behind them. I built a spreadsheet by year and by category, watched the total climb toward $290,000 over 6 years, and added a column titled Promises. Under it, I typed the dates I had been told repayment would begin after it stabilizes. Next came screenshots. On one side, I captured Brian's late-night claims of being broke. On the other, I placed recent photos from Jessica's public feed, vacations, designer handbags, tastings at restaurants that book out weeks in advance. I did not add a caption. The juxtaposition did the work. I printed each page and marked the dates with a yellow pen so no one could say the order was unclear. Finally, I built a timeline of asks. Small and urgent at first, the kind of calls that happen to every family. Then larger, regular, expected, framed as we already decided. I added notations where my grief for Emily made me say yes without debate. I added one more row across the bottom and titled it Pattern Recognized. The line broke the habit that had drained both my savings and my goodwill. When the binder sat full and square on the desk, I called Howard Brennan. He answered on the second ring with a voice that sounded like a level surface. I explained the invasion, the police report, and the social push. I read the numbers. Without heat. Howard listened until I finished and then laid out a plan in steady language. Move to court. Plead unjust enrichment and detrimental reliance. Consider elder financial abuse if discovery shows pressure. Add defamation for the knowingly false statements broadcast to a wide audience. File quickly. Ask the court to preserve online records and attach exhibits that leave little to debate. He also said we would seek a preservation order to stop deletions on the platforms, collect affidavits from witnesses who saw the convoy and the police, and attach the incident report. His last line was simple. Your records are a fortress. Bring them in, and we will build the walls higher with certified copies. At the bank, Patricia Williams, the branch manager, led me to a desk away from the morning traffic. I gave her a list of dates and amounts. She returned with printouts on heavy paper bearing the bank seal. Each page carried my name, the account number masked, the transfer line bolded, and the destination marked Brian Miller. She printed a second set for the court and called a notary before I could ask. Practical, swift, no theater. Back at Howard's office, we organized the packet. He adjusted the index and added the bank certifications behind a new tab marked Exhibits. He drafted the complaint with factual paragraphs that read like patient steps. Brian solicited funds repeatedly. Brian promised to repay when business stabilized. Brian later said gifts were unconditional while continuing to request assistance. The invasion occurred on Friday. The defendant published false statements on Saturday. The plaintiff suffered reputational harm. The causes of action followed in a clean list: unjust enrichment, detrimental reliance, elder financial abuse if supported in discovery, defamation. The requested relief fit on one page: restitution on a schedule, retraction and removal of false statements, fees and costs. Filing morning, I reached the courthouse before the doors unlocked. When the clerk slid the window open, I was first in line. She read the caption, stamped the first page, and wrote a case number in blue ink that made my hands stop shaking. She told me the department and the assigned judge. Service of process could go out within the hour. I signed where she pointed, paid the fee, and stepped into the hallway lighter by several pounds I had not known I was carrying. Only then did I return to the online square. I posted one calm message with redacted screenshots of transfers, a simple total at the bottom, and a single line: courts will settle facts. I did not argue point by point. I did not match tone. I let documentation stand next to accusation and kept the invitation open for anyone who wanted to ask questions without a mob looking on. The replies did not roar. They shifted. A former neighbor wrote that he had watched the line of cars and heard the music through the fence. A colleague said I had covered for staff families more than once when emergencies struck. A cousin apologized for rushing to judgment and asked for the police incident number. Someone who had shared Brian's post removed it and wrote that truth deserved more than a single camera angle. By late morning, my phone showed Brian's name. I answered on the third ring. His voice came without swagger. "Richard, we should not drag each other through court. Let's meet and work this out like family." I kept my answer brief. "From here forward, all communication goes through counsel. We will let the process work." He tried 3 new approaches in a minute: apology, nostalgia, warning. I repeated the same sentence each time until he went quiet. That afternoon, his pages slowed. The car confession video sat where he had pinned it, but fresh posts stopped coming. Questions appeared under the older ones that he did not answer. Where did the money go? Why say children were there when the report listed only adults? Why threaten by text and plead for compassion in public? The attention he had summoned began to turn and ask for receipts he could not provide. Howard filed a notice to preserve records with the platforms and sent letters to likely witnesses. The neighbor agreed to sign a brief affidavit. Officer Johnson forwarded the incident number and the language from the report, stating that the homeowner requested removal of uninvited guests and that the group complied after instruction. Patricia emailed to confirm that additional certified pages would be ready if the judge wanted the full ledger. I filled the in-between hours with small discipline tasks. I cleaned the thin ring a beer can had left on the counter. I set the sound system back to a playlist of wind and piano. I wrote a thank you to the officers for their professionalism and clipped the report copy behind the police tab. I walked the beach without my phone, counted 7 pelicans in formation, and let my breathing fall into step with theirs. Near sunset, Howard called with a brief update that carried more weight than its syllables. Service complete. The deputy had handed Brian the packet at his apartment door and noted the time. A green card would arrive for the file. A response deadline now existed, fixed and unemotional. I wrote the date on a sticky note and placed it on the binder cover like a quiet clock I did not need to hear to respect. Jessica called after dark. Her voice carried more fear than theater. "Richard, he says we could lose the house. He says you will ruin us." I stood at the kitchen island and kept my tone even. The court will decide what is true and what is owed. We will follow whatever the judge orders. She asked if we could meet without lawyers. I said no. She asked if there was anything she could do. "Tell the truth," I said. "Start there." By morning, my measured post had traveled further than I expected. It did not go viral. It did something better. It found the people who mattered. Margaret, one of Emily's closest friends, wrote a long message of apology for judging before knowing. An old project manager emailed to say the numbers looked like the way I ran jobs, precise and transparent. The neighbor across the lane offered his door camera footage of the convoy, time-stamped and clear. Back downtown, Howard asked me to stop by for a quick check before filing the preservation motion with attachments. He pressed the record button on a small device to test an intake statement, and the red light winked once, then steadied. We spoke into the room as if it were a witness. Name, date, case number, brief recitation of facts. The simple ritual of making a clean record calmed my pulse more than any argument online ever could. From there, I walked to the bank to pick up the additional certified pages Patricia had prepared. She slid them across the counter one by one, each sheet heavy with watermark and embossed with a round seal that caught the light. We verified totals together without drama. She wished me luck in a tone that sounded like respect for process rather than sides. I left with a folder that felt like a small shield built from ink and time. At home, I placed the new pages behind their tab and closed the rings with a soft click. The binder was no longer a stack of paper. It was a map, a memory, and a promise that the next conversation would happen in the right place. I stepped onto the terrace. The air smelled of salt and sun-warmed stone. Far offshore, a fishing boat stitched a bright seam across the water. I let the scene reset my bearings. By afternoon, Brian's pages went quiet. My binder's clock did not. A hearing date would come with a room, a judge, record. I had allies and evidence. He had sympathy turned to questions. The vice was built. I would tighten it by showing up. The courthouse air feels refrigerated, thinner than the ocean air I've been breathing for months. Fluorescent panels buzz and flicker, and for a moment I stand still in the long hallway and listen to the sound they make, like an old ballast warming, like a machine waking up to count what's real. The bench beneath the directory board is varnished oak, rubbed smooth by years of anxious hands. I rest mine on it and feel the groove where people have waited for their names to be called. Brian is already here. He looks smaller without his sunglasses and without a crowd. No convoy, no thumping playlist. Just a rented suit that doesn't quite fit. Shoulders too tight. Trouser hem buckling on cheap dress shoes. He has a lawyer next to him, the kind who carries his entire practice in a scuffed briefcase. Budget counsel or public defender drafted for civil duty. No camera, no live stream. Jessica is absent. Or maybe she's in the back somewhere, quiet for once, phone dark. Howard approaches with his measured stride, warm nod, eyes bright, the way they get, right before he unrolls the map and shows everyone the terrain they forgot they were standing on. He doesn't ask how I'm doing. We've already talked about. That he just taps the folder in his hand. Cream tab, blue tape, the case number handwritten in the corner like a call sign, and says, "The records are a fortress." Then we let the fortress speak, I say. We enter Department 12. Judge Martinez presides. The courtroom is smaller than television makes them. Fluorescence again, but steadier. Pews arranged in two tight rows. A seal behind the bench, state motto in a ring. Flags standing in their brass cups. The clerk is fast with the docket, her voice precise in the way I've come to trust. She calls our case, and the silence that follows is the cleanest sound I've heard since the day the convoy arrived. We rise. We sit. Howard begins with the housekeeping, and then he sets a binder on counsel table. The same binder I watched him build across 3 long afternoons, spine labeled with our case number, inside dividers marked with little adhesive flags, transfers, promises, screens, affidavits, seals. He opens to the chronological matrix and slides 1 copy to the clerk, 1 to the judge, 1 to opposing counsel. I know the matrix by heart, a table of dates, amounts, purposes, each row tied to a document in the appendix, each column validated by the bank's certified stamps. Not a story, a ledger of reality. Your Honor, Howard says, gentle like he's setting a fragile instrument on velvet. This matter arises out of sustained financial support rendered by my client, Richard Hale, to the defendant, Brian Carter, across a period of 6 years. The defense has framed these transfers as pure gifts. The record shows otherwise. He turns the first page for the judge, not patronizing, more like a docent turning a museum placard for an audience that deserves the best view. We have 42 transfers totaling $289,760.54. He pauses, lets the number land and settle. Each accompanied by a contemporaneous note of purpose, tuition shortfall, medical invoice, down payment supplement, emergency rent during employment, gap, and paired in many instances with written acknowledgments and promises to repay when finances stabilize. Where there is no express promise, we submit detrimental reliance and unjust enrichment theories based on pattern and conduct. The appendix includes certified copies under seal by First Coastal Bank, affidavit of authenticity, by branch manager Patricia L. Merritt, notarized. Tabs A through F. Judge Martinez lifts the first set of proofs. He doesn't hurry. He leans back and scans the seals the way a builder inspects joists. "Counsel," he says to Brian's lawyer, "you have copies?" Budget counsel nods, already flipping. He is trying to decide whether to argue facts or whether. Facts are concrete. Whether is everything else. Most choose whether when they lack concrete. Howard continues. We also include a series of social media posts by the defendant and his spouse, now taken down in part, but preserved as exhibits with time. Stamps, asserting that my client called police on his family, after withholding help, and changing once he got money. In these posts, the defendant and his spouse state that all prior assistance was pure gift, with no strings, and that any suggestion otherwise is elder cruelty. We will show those statements were false and, in context, defamatory by omission of material fact, specifically omitting the quantifiable history of support and the explicit acknowledgments of repayment. The judge looks at me, not a long look, just enough to place me in his landscape. "Mr. Hale," he says, "good morning." "Good morning, Your Honor. Are you comfortable proceeding today?" "I am." Howard pivots to the timeline. January 6th, Year 1, $3,000, labeled emergency rent. Avoid eviction. Follow-up text from defendant. I'll pay you back when Jessica's contract renews. March 14th, Year 1, $4,800, MBA installment number 2. July 9th, Year 2, $60,000 wire, down payment supplement to secure rate. Text acknowledgement same day. We'll refinance and repay you when equity comes in. November 23, Year 3, $85,000. Medical costs not covered. A note to self by Mr. Hale referencing a family history and the rationale for speed. 38 more, smaller, larger. The pattern is not random generosity. It is structured support under expectations the recipients articulated in writing budget counsel. Clears his throat. Your Honor, we don't dispute the generosity. We dispute the characterization. There was never a loan contract. Mr. Hale never asked for repayment until now, after emotions changed. He presented himself as a father figure. Howard doesn't interrupt. He waits. The judge lifts a hand when he's heard enough. "We'll get to the legal characterization," he says. "I'd like to understand the narrative as supported by documents." Howard nods gratefully. He has a way of thanking the court simply by continuing to be clear. "Your Honor, we also include Exhibit G, a compendium of posts by the defendant and his spouse over the months they allege financial distress. The compendium shows contemporaneous expenditures, luxury travel, leased vehicles, high-end appliances, which in isolation prove nothing, but when paired with the "we are broke" requests, show a divergence between representation and behavior. He slides color printouts forward. The judge glances at a frame of Jessica posing with branded shopping bags, date stamped the same week Brian messaged me. "We can't afford groceries, Dad." I remember my thumb hovering over the transfer that day, the way I sighed and told myself kindness is a muscle. I also remember how muscles tear when they're misused. Howard softens his tone. "This is not a case about punishing lifestyle. It is about consequence for false narrative, weaponized for clout." After Mr. Hale lawfully asked uninvited guests to leave his home, the defendant initiated a campaign online, asserting cruelty and abandonment while omitting 6 years of quantifiable aid and the existence of repayment promises. Those omissions made the statements misleading and caused reputational harm. We seek equitable relief, restitution on an agreed tranche, a formal retraction, and protective orders to ensure peace. Judge Martinez steeples his fingers. His voice is steady, the same pitch he used when he said, "Good morning." "Mr. Carter, would you like to say anything before I ask questions?" Brian's lawyer leans in, whispers. Brian looks at me for the first time. The look is both apology and calculation, a field of trampled grass in which he is searching for one edible flower. He swallows. "Your Honor, I messed up the posts." I was angry. I felt embarrassed the police were called. It was family. I thought, Mr. Hale has always given. It felt like gifts, like love. "We said things we shouldn't." Howard lifts a hand only slightly. "Your Honor, may I ask 2 narrow questions on cross?" 2. Howard turns to Brian. "Mr. Carter, could you read the last line of your message to my client dated July 9th, year 2, at 9:14 p.m.? Brian flips, finds the page. His voice is smaller than in my living room. It says, "We'll refinance and repay you when equity comes in. Promise." And the caption under your spouse's video on March 1st, year 5. He stares at the paper as if the ink will change. Says all gifts, no strings. He changed. "Thank you." The judge leans forward. "Mr. Carter, the law can recognize gifts. It can also recognize patterns where the parties behave as though funds will be repaid and where statements create reliance. The absence of a formal note does not end the inquiry. What troubles me more today is the public campaign that elided material facts, omitting 6-figure assistance while inviting judgment on Mr. Hale. That omission, in context, can be defamatory. Do you understand that?" Brian nods. "Yes, Your Honor." "Good." Judge Martinez looks at Howard. "Counsel, what are you asking this court to do?" Howard doesn't switch to thunder. He stays in rain. "We believe the fairest path, consistent with equity and mindful of the human relationships that survive these cases, is structured restitution with standard enforcement mechanisms, a formal retraction and apology across the same platforms used to spread the statements, and protective terms to keep peace at Mr. Hale's home." He slides a short proposed order forward, already drafted. The judge reads, eyes traveling calmly. Budget counsel clears his throat again. "Your Honor, my client can't pay $289,000. He can't pay anywhere close. He has 2 kids. He's been trying to make it right." Howard does not smile. "We are not asking for the full historical total today," he says. "We're asking for an enforceable tranche that imposes consequence and sets a bar for behavior, a floor, not a moonshot." The judge raises an eyebrow. "Numbers?" Howard turns the page. $150,000 in restitution over 36 months. First payment within 30 days of order. Monthly installments thereafter. If any payment is missed, wage garnishment triggers automatically under the statutory cap until the default is cured, with the remaining schedule adjusted forward. No contact with Mr. Hale except through counsel. Trespass warning on file with the local department for the beach property. Any violation treated as trespass. Retraction and apology. Text provided by counsel to be posted on the defendant's primary platforms, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, pinned for 30 days, not deleted, comments left on. The text will acknowledge the material omissions, withdraw the claim of pure gifts, and state that the matter has been resolved through proper channels. The courtroom becomes very quiet. Outside, a siren dopplers down the avenue, then vanishes. Judge Martinez sits with the proposal. He doesn't look at me. He looks at the paper and thinks about precedent and people. "Mr. Carter," he finally says, "with counsel, confer. You may step into the hallway for 5 minutes. Come back with a straight answer. Yes, with understanding, or no, and we proceed on findings." Brian's lawyer rises with him. They move toward the door. At the threshold, Brian turns, not to me, but toward the body of the room, and I see him search for an audience that isn't there. The door sighs shut. Howard exhales, not relief, but readiness. "He'll take it," he murmurs. "He can't risk findings that quote those posts." I nod. I keep my eyes on the judge's bench, on the little clock to the right of his computer screen. The second hand makes a round and touches the 12. The fluorescent hum is steady. There is nothing performative here. This is a room that eats performance. The door opens. Brian returns. His lawyer speaks. "Your Honor, my client will agree to the structure as proposed, with one request, that the apology text not include the word lie. He is willing to acknowledge omission and withdraw the claim of gifts, but the word carries heat." Howard doesn't look at me for permission. He knows my stance: justice, not ruin; accuracy, not revenge. He nods. We can agree to misled by omission and withdrawn as inaccurate. Judge Martinez adjusts his glasses. "All right. Let me read the terms into the record, and then I'll ask both parties to affirm." He speaks, and the clerk's fingers dance across her keyboard, recording the order that will soon have a stamp and a signature, and the weight of a courthouse behind it. On the record, in Department 12, in the matter of Hale versus Carter parties, present with counsel. The court accepts the stipulation and enters the following order. Defendant shall pay restitution to plaintiff in the amount of $150,000. $150,000 over a period of 36 months. The first installment is due within 30 days of today's date. Subsequent installments shall be paid on the first business day of each month thereafter. Upon any missed payment, plaintiff may initiate wage garnishment proceedings pursuant to statute without further order of this court, subject to applicable caps, until the arrearage is cured. Defendant shall post on his primary social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, a retraction and apology drafted by counsel, acknowledging that prior posts misled by omission of material facts, withdrawing the characterization of funds received as pure gifts, and noting that the matter has been resolved through proper legal channels. Such posts shall remain publicly visible and pinned for 30 days. Comments shall remain enabled. Defendant shall not delete or obscure said posts during the pin period. Defendant shall have no direct contact with plaintiff except through counsel for the duration of this order. A trespass warning is authorized for plaintiff's residence known as the beach property. Law enforcement is requested to respond accordingly to any reported violation. The court retains jurisdiction to enforce this order. Failure to comply may result in sanctions, including but not limited to monetary penalties and findings. He sets the paper down. The gavel doesn't fall yet. He looks at me. "Mr. Hale, do you accept these terms?" "I do, Your Honor." He looks at Brian. "Mr. Carter?" Brian swallows. "Yes, Your Honor." "Good. Mr. Carter, I want you to understand something beyond the numbers. The law is not a message board. It is slower and it is heavier. You can throw words online like rice at a wedding. In here, words are bricks. If you lie, if you omit materially, you build something that will fall on you. Do you understand?" Brian nods again. "Yes." Judge Martinez turns to the clerk. Enter order as stated. The 30-day clock begins today. He lifts the gavel and gives a single soft strike. It is not cinematic. It is better. It is final. We stand. Papers shuffle. The courtroom reanimates with small sounds. A zipper, a chair leg on tile, a whisper that isn't mine to hear. Howard closes the binder as if he's tucking a child into bed. He smiles once, quick. Peace returns, he says, not as a platitude but as a measurement. In the hallway, the fluorescent hum returns to its role as choir. People in other cases pass, heads down, suit jackets too big or too small, hope folded into manila envelopes. Brian steps toward me with his hands half raised the way you might approach a skittish dog. His lawyer is a step behind, ready to intervene. Richard, Brian says, and my name in his mouth is both plea and habit. Can we talk? Just us? I glance at Howard. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't have to. We discussed this exact moment last night over coffee at my kitchen island, the kettle clicking, the ocean in the dark beyond the glass. I hear my own voice from then. I won't let the last scene become the first erosion. Counsel only, I say. From now on, everything goes through counsel. His shoulders sag. He tries again. It wasn't supposed to get here. The posts, Jess said. Counsel, I repeat, calm, not unkind. Just a straight line drawn with a ruler. His lawyer steps in, professional, grateful for the boundary. Brian will coordinate with Mr. Brennan. Payments. The post text. Let's head downstairs. Brian nods, eyes somewhere near my shoes. For one brief second, I remember him at my grill 3 summers ago, flipping steaks like a man auditioning for fatherhood, calling me sir and asking about charcoal versus gas. And I realize how much of love is projection, what we put on someone else the way we hang art on a nail that cannot hold the weight. Then the image passes, and I am back in the courthouse, the corridor lined with the proof of what happened. Howard touches my elbow, a light press to direct us to a quieter corner near the corkboard of legal aid flyers. The clerk will email the signed order by end of day, he says. We'll have a template for the retraction ready by tomorrow morning. You'll review, I'll send, they'll post. We calendar the first payment date. If it misses, garnishment. We won't have to chase them across platforms. We let the order do the running. I look at the corkboard, photocopies curling at the edges, hotline numbers in block fonts, a flyer about small claims with a cartoon of a handshake. And I feel something I haven't allowed myself since the day I closed on the villa. The feeling that my life is not something other people can invade when they want content. The hallway is the same color. The buzz is the same buzz. But the weight in my chest has shifted. Thank you, I tell Howard. He shakes his head. You did the slow work, he says. Documentation. Boundaries. You walked away from the narrative war and brought the case to a place where facts count. Most people never make that turn. We leave Department 12. The elevator doors open with a shudder and swallow us. A young couple in the corner of the car stares at their shoes. A bailiff hums something that might be a hymn. We ride down through the floors like descending through layers of argument to bedrock. Outside, the light is different than when we entered. Brighter, less winter, more noon. The courthouse steps are wide, and the stone holds the sun like a memory. Howard peels off to call the process server about the text of the apology. I sit on the low wall that borders the steps and take my phone out. The notifications are already changing. Fewer flame emojis, more question marks, a couple of direct messages from Brian's old friends saying some version of, "We didn't know." I don't reply. I won't reply. The order will do the talking. A few minutes later, the door opens again, and Brian exits with his lawyer. He doesn't look for me this time. He looks at the sky like he's trying to read a forecast. His lawyer points toward the parking lot and speaks quietly, probably about the bank details, the 30-day clock, the fact that the posts will have to stay up for a full month with comments on. Consequence has a long tail. It swishes at flies long after the horse has moved on. My phone buzzes. A message from the clerk. Order entered. A PDF attached. I open it. The header is the same as all court orders. State seal, caption, font no one outside the legal world would ever choose on purpose. But the paragraphs are mine, in the sense that I lived them. Restitution, retraction, no contact, trespass. The verbs I needed. I forward the email to Howard, then to a folder I created last night called Beach House Peace. Inside, subfolders, bank, order, apology screens, calendar. It looks like a little office inside my phone. It looks like a study with a brass plate on the wall. Howard returns, thumbs up. They'll have the draft post by morning, he says. Language is clean. No spikes, just truth. I don't need spikes, I say, just ground. He smiles at that, the way a man smiles when a job is properly finished and there is still time in the day to sit in the sun. Call me if your nerves flare tonight, he says. That happens sometimes after court. Your body doesn't know the fight is over yet. I nod. He's right. The body lags. But here, now, steps warm under me. I can feel my nervous system starting to step down, one integer at a time. Across the street, a food cart rattles closer to the curb. The smell of onions lifts and floats above the traffic. A sparrow lands on the railing near my hand, head twitching, eye a bead of polished wood. It hops sideways, looks at me, decides I'm not interesting, and flits away. The world keeps its ordinary commitments. Brian passes on the sidewalk below. He doesn't see me. He's looking at his phone, scrolling, probably between bank app and social app and calendar app, the way he used to toggle between ask, blame, and charm. For a moment, compassion touches me, not the soft kind that makes excuses, but the austere kind that recognizes the boundary between what is mine and what is not. I don't wish him ruin. I wish him a life he built. That's different. Howard and I shake hands. He heads toward the parking structure. I turn the other way, toward the taxi stand. Not because I need a ride, but because I want to walk past the fountains where kids throw pennies and make wishes that will age well. When I pass them, I think of Emily, the way she used to wish for other people's wishes. So they get two, she'd say. And I picture the brass plate waiting on my study wall, unseen by the world, but perfectly readable to me. Document first, decide second. My phone buzzes. Again. Not a message, a calendar notification I set myself last night. A small private ritual. 30-day clock starts. Breathe. I tap done. The act is tiny. It feels like untying a knot. Back at the villa later, I'll print the order and slide it into the binder with the same care I give to photos, to manuals, to the instructions for the kettle I still keep, though I can run it blind now. I'll open the balcony and let the ocean draft the room. The house will be quiet in the way houses are when they are respected rather than occupied. I'll make tea. I'll send a short post, not triumph, not clapback, just a sentence. Resolved through proper channels. And when the comments come, when the curious and the contrite mix in the feed, I'll leave them be. The narrative doesn't need me anymore. For now, I stand, tuck the phone away, and take the courthouse steps down one at a time. The building at my back is plain, the way most strong things are. No marble angels, no iron gates. Just a place where documents outweigh declarations, and where a single soft strike of a gavel can move a weight from one set of shoulders to another. Justice, not ruin. I said it to Howard, and then I said it to myself, and now the phrase fits in my mouth like something I can taste. It tastes like clean water. It tastes like something you would serve to a guest you invited, planned for, welcomed. In a home where the master bedroom is off limits because you say it is, and because the law agrees. As I walk, a breeze lifts the edges of the papers in my folder. I press them flat, not out of fear they'll blow away, but because order, once restored, asks to be kept. The 30-day clock has started. The file is real. The house is mine. The internet will turn its head toward the next loud thing. The court has spoken on this one, and that is enough. Evening softened the windows to gold, and I posted one line that fit the day and the man I want to be. Resolved through proper channels. Thank you to those who waited for facts. I closed the laptop and let the phone buzz on the counter. The messages were different now. Old co-workers, a neighbor, two of Emily's friends. Not fireworks, not drama. Just quiet notes that said, "We're glad you're all right, and we're sorry we believed noise before we saw proof." The villa breathed again. I moved room to room and reset the shape of my life with small, deliberate actions. The armchair rotated toward the ocean instead of the television. The throw blanket folded into a neat stripe. A dent from a beer can ring disappeared under a patient cloth. In the guest bath, a faint makeup smear had clung to the marble. Warm water lifted it clean, and the stone looked like it remembered what it was for. Bathing a guest, not broadcasting a life. Down the hall, the master door opened on a space that belongs to memory and sleep. I had replaced the cracked glass on Emily's photo that afternoon. The tiny fracture a stranger's carelessness had left. Fresh paint, clean edges. The picture moved a few inches, so the morning light will find her smile first. I said the truth aloud to an empty room. Love can be firm without becoming hard. It can say welcome and also mean not this way. In the study, I took a thin brass plate from a drawer and fixed it inside the cabinet door with two short screws pulled from the bin, labeled fasteners. Document first, decide second. The words were there before all this, but they fit better now. When feeling rises like a tide, right. When stories arrive without receipts, right. When anyone tries to use kindness as a lever, right. A closed cabinet with a quiet rule can guard a house better than a loud speech. I wrote a guest policy on one page in a plain font and slid it behind clear plastic at the back of the binder across from the incident report. Ask first. Agree dates. Limit head count. Respect rooms. No filming without permission. If a boundary is broken, the visit ends. A second copy went inside the pantry door, where it keeps company with the grocery list. Rules are not fences against people. They are rails that keep generosity upright when weather hits. The phone lit with a name I like to see. David, my nephew, Emily's cousin who never asked for money and always offered to help. He had read the court docket, saw my short post, and said he wanted to come by if it worked for me. We opened our calendars and landed on the same weekend. The guest room would be ready. I promised ginger ale and the cinnamon toast he loved when he was 10, and he promised bread he makes now and a real conversation. Night arrived the way peace does, not all at once, but in a series of small permissions. The kettle clicked. The surf kept patient time. I carried tea to the terrace and watched a thin ribbon of pink ride the horizon. Far down the sand, a dog studied a tide line like it could solve a mystery if given another minute. I felt the familiar tug to recheck locks and emails and alarms, then let the tug pass. Vigilance had done its job. Boundaries would carry the rest. I practiced what I would say when the camera turns on next time, because stories deserve endings that help. Generosity isn't a ransom. Real love wears boundaries. The law speaks when people won't. The words sounded plain and right in the quiet kitchen. Not triumph, not spite. Instruction to anyone who needs it, including me. I had confused forgiveness with access for years. Tonight the difference was simple. Forgiveness is free. Access is earned, kept, and sometimes withdrawn. Before bed, I walked the perimeter of ordinary things. Patio slider latched, side gate bolt seated, windows open enough to invite salt air and closed enough to keep yesterday out. In the study, the binder now stood between an engineering handbook and a dictionary. Not a weapon, a tool. I slid a blank notebook beside it and printed a label on the spine. Home log. The first entries were small. Replace foyer rug pad. Call Emily's florist. About lilies. Invite David for a proper weekend. Saturday arrived clear as glass. I set a table on the balcony, 2 plates and a bowl of fruit, and waited for the shape of David's car to appear on the road that curves to the drive. When he stepped out, he wasn't filming. He was carrying a warm loaf and a jar of jam a neighbor makes each summer. His hug landed with respect. We stood facing the water longer than we meant to, and for once the silence didn't ask for anything. We ate slow. We told Emily stories that only asked us to remember, not explain or excuse. He reminded me of the kite with the painted crescent that she swore flew better because it looked like the sky at night. I told him about the backsplash she helped me tile and how she stood on a crate and said, "Good work is slow, Dad." After lunch, he helped me angle the couch so the ocean framed conversation again. He asked to see the workshop and nodded at the labeled bins. At dusk, we walked the beach and let the tide erase our prints like a promise kept. David said he had read the comments as they turned and that the quiet apologies from Brian's own friends had meant the most. Not because they fix anything, but because they prove that truth travels, even when it leaves late. I told him I would rather be late with truth than early with a story that harms people. He agreed, and we let the water lap our shoes without stepping back. I printed a small card and taped it beside the brass plate inside the cabinet. Be generous, not naive. The same sentence that sits on a card near my desk, now duplicated where I keep the tools that manage the rest of my life. I adjusted Emily's photo a fraction until the morning light would meet the corner and brighten her eyes. Grief did not shrink. It shifted, and in that small shift, I felt room for gratitude beside it without one canceling the other. Support kept arriving during the week like slow rain that soaks instead of floods. A neighbor shared doorbell footage with Howard. An old colleague asked to bring his wife by for coffee in a month, and he used the words that matter if it's a good time. A woman from church wrote that my sentence about ransom and boundaries is now inside her pantry. I answered each message with thanks and the same 3 truths. Document, decide, be kind, even when you say no. Sleep returned the way it used to arrive when I came home from long projects. 1 night, then 2, then a full week without waking at the sound of a phantom footstep. Morning coffee tasted like coffee again instead of anxiety. I stood at the balcony rail while the sun climbed and felt worry shrink to a weight I could carry without folding. Nothing in me had closed. The door that needed closing had closed. The door that needed opening faced the sea. On Friday, Howard called with the kind of progress that doesn't make a headline and changes everything anyway. Settlement talks were underway. A public retraction drafted by counsel came first, not a performance post. A payment schedule would take time, and that was fine. I told him I do not need anyone ruined. I need the boundary to hold across seasons. He said courts draw longer lines than comment threads, and I wrote that sentence in the home log because it deserves to live somewhere I check. That evening, I added 1 more line to the log. Peace, refilled. Not the brittle version that comes from winning a scene. The steady version that returns when the house tells the truth about who lives here and how. I turned off the lamp and let the room settle into outlines. The ocean kept time at the edge of the lot, the way it has for centuries. I left the balcony door an inch open and watched the curtain breathe. A good house breathes when you let it. Tonight, the house feels earned, and finally, mine, truly. The camera softens, the colors warmer now, balcony light spilling across the marble. The ocean dusk folded into the background hum. I sit with a calm smile, not triumphant, just steady, the way you do when the storm has passed and the house is still standing. If this story hit home, I say, voice even, inviting, please subscribe, like, and share it with someone who might need the reminder that kindness needs a backbone. Too often, people confuse generosity with weakness, but boundaries, clear, firm, and calm, are the real proof of love, both for others and for ourselves. I lean forward slightly, as though to bring the audience closer, and I'd like to hear from you. Tell us in the comments, have you ever had to post a hard boundary to protect your peace? What happened, and what did you learn? This channel has become more than stories. It's become a conversation, and your voice is part of it. On screen, subscribe. New stories. Weekly, comment your story. B-roll rolls in soft cuts. The officer's knock on the door. Redacted screenshots sliding across the screen. The thump of a notary stamp. The clerk window with its glass reflection. The calm face of Judge Martinez. Then back to the villa balcony. A brass plate catching morning light. Belonging versus extraction. The math of love measured in years of sacrifice. Public disrespect countered by calm justice. And dignity restored when house rules and quiet futures replace noise. That's what this story meant to me, and maybe, in some way, to you. I let the words breathe, then add the closing line with a half smile. Next time, a neighbor tries to move a property line with a fence until survey pins and a drone say otherwise, you won't want to miss it. The final frame holds steady on the villa balcony, gulls calling faintly, ocean moving in silver strokes. Then the text fades in. Subscribe, share, tell your story. The music trails out on a single warm chord, leaving the space open, like the pause after a truth well told.